Thank you very much, Anna. That's great. Hopefully you should now be able to see the start of my talk. Any problems, let us know. But I've shared the screen. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me along. Gives me great pleasure to talk about subjects I'm, as you'll see by the end of the 40 minutes of my talk, absolutely passionate about and in a beautiful part of the world. And hopefully you'll get more of an insight as to certainly what I've been up to over the last 30 years of my career. First thing is, see if I can do that. That's fine. So tonight I'm going to be talking about pre-hospital trauma care, basically in Cumbria, as far as from my experience point of view. Obviously, there are lots of us up here doing it, and people have different experiences, but this is purely my personal perspective on hopefully a few experiences I've gained over the last 30 years. I'm talking about basics, which I've been very involved in, the Great North Air Ambulance Service, which I was part of for 20 years, the Patterdale Mountain Rescue Team, and how hopefully a little bit of snippets about how these services have developed over that time. I'll be throwing in a few case histories to illustrate my points. Hopefully these will give you some sort of interest in part of not just a whole list of sort of figures and facts and things. And also how you can adapt clinical practice to these very remote parts of the UK, and summing up with a few key messages and learning points at the end. So just to start right back at the beginning, I trained in London many years ago. I did my GP training at Northampton between 84 and 87. I then joined the Birbeck Medical Practice in Penrith, a local GP practice, in 92. The year after that, I joined the Patterdale Mountain Rescue Team, but as I was getting a little bit creaky around the edges and not able to keep up with the young blood striking off up the hillside, I left in December 22. And in 1994, I set up the basics scheme that is now in existence in Cumbria, called Beat Doctors, used to be called Beat Fund. I became very passionate about pre-hospital care, and when the Great North Air Ambulance put an aircraft in Cumbria for the very first time in 2003, I was lucky enough to be able to sign up for that, and had been working for them for 20 years until December last year. And I'm also now still employed by the local ambulance service, North West Ambulance Service, as part of their what's so-called merit service, but I'll tell you a little bit about that a little bit later on. So yeah, as I mentioned already, we do live in the most beautiful part of the world, and if you haven't been up to the lakes, please do come and visit. It's a glorious part of the world, both in summer and in winter. Sometimes Ullswater Lake, just down the road from me, does get frozen over occasionally. But on summer days like this, like it is today, in fact, it's absolutely glorious down at the lake. But unfortunately, tragedy does happen, and we get accidents, as we do in all parts of the country, with traffic going through. We've got the M6, the A6, and the A66, all transecting the main trunk roads, transecting our beautiful Cumbria. And these are all pictures of jobs or incidents that I've been to over the last 30 years and tried to help people at the roadside. Thankfully, people in this car weren't too badly hurt, but it looks a bit of a mess, as you can see. So what are the challenges? Well, we are very remote up here, one of the most remote parts of the UK. There are big mountains, there are lots of lakes, lots of rivers, there's lots of water things. Weather can be very inclement, and the environment too. On days like today, it's absolutely glorious, but you can still get hypothermia and become quite unwell up on the mountainside. And also resources can be quite limited in this part of the world. At some parts of the day and night, you only have one ambulance in this region. So if something big happens, then it can take a while to get local resources to you. I'm going to start off with my first case history, which I guess illustrates the remoteness of where we live. This was a few years ago in 2015. It was 6:30 in the morning. It was frosty. It was February. It was cold, foggy. I got a page of messages from the ambulance service saying there's a 5-vehicle road traffic collision up on the A66 at Bowes-Moor, which is sort of halfway across the A66 from where I live in Penrith towards Scotch Corner. There's several injured. One was trapped. I set off in my car, which has blue lights and sirens, arrived approximately 30 minutes later to find one casualty still trapped in his vehicle in a ditch. He's a 19-year-old young lad, a professional rugby player who was on his way back home, having spent the weekend with friends out on the west coast. He was still trapped, but he was almost cut free. This map shows basically where he was. That big red splodge in the middle is where the accident happened. As you can see, the purple crosses, you can see my cursor here, these are all the local trauma units. Carlisle is a trauma unit plus. It has slightly more than a normal trauma unit, but our nearest major trauma centres are up here in Newcastle, the RVI, and James Cook Hospital in Middlesbrough, and down in Preston. So you're about as far as you can get from a major trauma centre at this accident. When I examined him in the car still, he was clearly in pain, quite agitated, had a reduced GCS of 7, he clearly had a serious head injury. Respiratory rate was up, blood pressure was a little bit equivocal, heart rate was up. I thought he probably had a fractured arm, certainly had a chest injury of some kind, and a possible pelvic fracture as well. So he was, I disappeared into the back of the ambulance, set up for an anaesthetic for him and RSI. A short while later, he was extricated by the fire service. We performed the anaesthetic successfully, splinted his arm, his pelvis. Chest seemed all right at that stage, and there was no possibility of an air ambulance because we were up in fog. So we set off towards James Cook along the A66, heading towards Middlesbrough, towards Scotch Corner. On the way, he did develop a tension pneumothorax, so we did thoracostomy, which relieved that. And then the fog cleared, and we managed to liaise with the air ambulance and transferred him to the helicopter, and he was flown onwards to James Cook. And I headed back to my GP surgery for typical Monday morning of coughs and colds and sore throats, etc. He spent 6 or 8 weeks in hospital, a good proportion of that on ITU. He did have a head injury with multiple rib fractures as well, and his fractured humerus. But eventually, after several months of physio and rehab, he made a very good recovery and essentially was back to normal and was able to continue his career. And I've met him since, and he was obviously extremely grateful for what we did. And I think providing that level of intervention that far away from hospital, I'd like to think, undoubtedly improved his outcomes and chances for the future. So this was one example of what kind of enthused me to set up our local basics charity. It started off because I set it up in the practice I was with. It was called the Birbeck Emergency Equipment for Patients, but we changed the name just recently. We set it up in '94 to provide an extra level of equipment and training for doctors. At that stage, it was just the doctors in our practice, GP-based, radius of approximately 10 or 15 miles from Penrith, and we had an extra level of equipment that essentially are the things that the ambulance service don't carry with them. We became a registered charity in 2000, and in 2005, a limited company. It really took off. We had a lot of local support, where we got the editor of the local paper involved in things as well, which was a great PR coup. It initially cost us £20,000–30,000 a year to keep going. We did some basic life support training and some local educational courses and things as well. So we filled the boot of our, we bought a specialist emergency response vehicle. Well, we actually went through 4 different vehicles over the subsequent years. But we filled them up with the monitoring, the ultrasound scanners, ventilators, things like that. As I say, also the fund paid for our training courses as well. So the car on the left there was our very first car. And then the car on the right, the Land Rover, was one that we had bought ourselves, but became too costly. So we ended up selling it about 5 or 6 years ago. This is the area that we covered initially for many years. Up until about 2019, when we decided that actually, because there were no similar basic schemes throughout the whole of Cumbria, that we could potentially take on the whole of Cumbria and incorporate various other doctors as well. So we changed our constitution and we changed the name to mean bringing enhanced emergency practice to patients instead of what we called it before. So it became Beep Doctors. We did a huge plug on social media, and if you follow us on social, you'll follow all the various things that we do through X and Facebook and things, and Instagram. We pay pro rata, a fundraising organisation called Together We Can Fundraising, who look at grants and pots of money for us to try and source extra bits of income, as well as just simply rattling and collecting at street corners and so on. We divided ourselves into subgroups. We bought some new PPE, and because we now cover the whole of Cumbria, there were doctors in the South Lakes, in Keswick, up in Carlisle, that then became part of BEEP. And so we now have 12 doctors, have a variety of skill mix. We have some consultants who are A&E consultants, some anaesthetic consultants. Probably half of us are still GPs, and a number of the doctors work for the local air ambulance, the Great North Air Ambulance as well. So there's it's a great skill mix, but they're all experienced. They've all done a lot of time either in A&E or in pre-hospital emergency medicine. And this is the map showing where we now cover, with the squares showing the various doctors spread throughout Cumbria. Unfortunately, we haven't got very many doctors in what we call the Wild West out at Workington, Whitehaven area, but we're looking to include some other doctors there if we possibly can. So, and we were, a couple of years ago, we were very fortunate to get sponsorship for 3 new vehicles. Basics, through the help appeal, helped us buy our first Volvo XC60, and then the next 2 cars were sponsored by Sellafield Social Impact Fund, who raised the money for us to buy the next 2 cars. And this year, as our 30th anniversary year, we're looking to buy a 4th vehicle. So the 4th vehicle will be based up in the north of the patch. We've got one of those cars based out towards the west Keswick area, another one with myself in the central and eastern area, Penrith, and then one down at Kendal. And we kind of share the cars between us, but all of our personal vehicles each have blue lights and sirens on, and we're all blue light trained. This is just a couple of our bits of kit. We've got a Lucas chest compression device there, and the Schiller Touch 7 monitor, which is our latest bit of monitoring and defibrillation kit, which is a great bit of kit. Just a picture of one of our doctors actively at the roadside there for a crashed motorbike. In the summer months, not far from Penrith, up towards Hartside and Alston, we get an awful lot of motorbike incidents, unfortunately. So what do we get called to? Well, most of the time we get called to road traffic collisions. That's probably 75% of our work. We get a lot of farming accidents as well. Farmers tend to have this predilection for climbing up on roofs, and then the roof gives way and they end up falling into a pile of slurry at the bottom, or tipping their quad bikes over, things like that. So we get quite a lot of farming accidents as well. Crush injuries. Unfortunately, the curse of knife crime is beginning to find its way up to the northwest of England as well. We've had 1 or 2 of those. And of course, with the lakes and the rivers, drownings, which I'll be talking about very shortly, and major incidents, again, which I'll highlight in a second. So we've, these are figures from last year. I won't dwell on all of these, but we had over 300 calls last year in 2003. A third of those were up in the north of the patch, around the Carlisle area, and not that far away down in this area, it had 72. RTCs and medical causes, 80 and 84. And 3/4 of the jobs are between 7:30 in the morning and 9 o'clock at night, but we do get a number in the middle of the night as well. We were very fortunate last year in November, I should say November 23 and October 23, that we had, well, I was very honoured to get the Basics Lifetime Achievement Award, and that the charity got the King's Award for Voluntary Service last year, which was a huge honour. I think the first basic scheme in the country to get this. And as I mentioned, this is our 30th anniversary, so we've got all sorts of celebrations and things going on this year. Sorry, just quickly, that's just the doctors showing off there. So this brings me on to my second case history, which was on to do with water. In 2019, I was in surgery in Penrith, and a call came in that a 12-year-old lad jumped off a bridge at a village called Appleby near here and hadn't surfaced. The air ambulance was contacted, obviously, as well as the ambulance service. Now, this is where Appleby is in relation to Penrith. So Penrith is here, and Appleby is down here. This little red blob was where by the bridge where the young lad had jumped in and hadn't surfaced. And as it happened, right nearby, there was a retained fire station with some firemen on site at the time. And one of them jumped into the river to try and look for him. So very quickly, there were people in the water trying to find him, including his dad and one of the fire service people. The first crew on scene, the first police on scene arrived after 13 minutes. And after 18 minutes after the call, but approximately 20-25 minutes of submersion time, this young lad was found and brought to surface. Basic life support was commenced. I got there a short time later, as did the Great North Air Ambulance helicopter. We provided various treatments, including some adrenaline, chest compressions, intubation, warming blanket, and so on. He remained in VF on the monitor throughout, so he was left on the chest compression device throughout the resuscitation, into the helicopter, and en route to the RVI in Newcastle. He arrived at the RVI in Newcastle with a core temperature of 28 degrees centigrade, placed onto bypass, onto ECMO, and gradually warmed up. At which point his heart went back into normal sinus rhythm, and on day 12 they managed to get him off a ventilator, on day 21 onto normal ward, and on day 56 he was actually discharged home essentially normal, apart from a slight speech impediment. And this is a huge success story for us. Absolutely amazing. You know, he certainly was, to all intents and purposes, had died, or certainly would have died if we hadn't done what we did. And it just shows the value in really good expedited pre-hospital emergency care and taking them to the right hospital, hopefully in the right time. It still took an hour and 20 minutes to get him to the RVI, but all that being said, it had a very good outcome. And I've met this young man and his family since, and they are so grateful because they realised what a close call this was. Which leads me on to talk a little bit about the air ambulance service that now exists in Cumbria. So, as I say, it started back in 2003, and with the Great North Air Ambulance Service being the main helicopter resource here. The GNAS has 2 Dauphin aircraft that are very fast, and as I'll show you pictures in a minute, quite spacious inside. They did start off as a small Bolco helicopter, which was extremely cramped, but now have these 2 very nice Dauphin aircraft. One is based in near Penrith, and the other one is based over near Durham Tees Valley Airport. And they essentially cover the whole of the north of England: Cumbria, Northumbria, Lancashire, and North Yorkshire. Each aircraft has a doctor plus a critical care paramedic, and obviously a pilot on board. The Northwest Air Ambulance are based slightly further in the south of the patch, so they have an aircraft at Blackpool and 2 aircraft at Barton Airfield, which is near Manchester. And one of their aircraft has a doctor on plus a paramedic. The other 2 aircraft have a double paramedic crew. The problem with both aircraft, with all air ambulances, really, I suppose, is that none of the ones in the UK have any winching capability. And the ones in this area have no night flying capability, although I know some parts of the UK, some of them do have night flying capability. And of course, limited by weather restrictions, which is when we call on the use of the search and rescue, the SAR helicopters. But again, I'll come on to that in a second. This is a picture of the Dauphin helicopter that GNAS now has, the 2 of them. Very capable aircraft indeed, very fast and very spacious inside. So these rings here show the one based at Penrith, one over at Teesside, and the red ones are these are all 10-minute flying times from their air ambulance bases. So essentially covering the whole of the north of the UK. The helicopters with GNAS, they do a 12-hour shift, but only daylight hours. So in the winter months, when the daylight hours are less, they switch on to a car for the rest of the 12-hour shift. But they cover 365 days a year, every single day of the year, and both sides of the Pennines now, they have a response car at night as well. And the response car in this area is signed up to do what we call hot transfers from the ED departments from Cumberland Infirmary in Carlisle and West Cumberland Hospital in Whitehaven across to the RBI. So if you have somebody that's very sick in either of those departments at night, the GNAS car will come and they will transfer them on pumps and drivers and things like that across to the RBI. So this brings you on to my third case history, which was in 2018. I was on the Helimed 58, which was the GNAS aircraft. We happened to be on a job up in Carlisle at the time, and there was reports of an RTC in Workington Harbour where a car had gone through a wooden fence, 2 young lads in that. One patient was trapped and was reportedly impaled with a wooden post. Because of the seriousness of the job, as well as tasking ourselves to it, they also tasked the Northwest Air Ambulance helicopter with a double paramedic crew on. All the GNAS aircraft carry blood products, 2 packed cells and 2 FFP. At that time, the 08, the Northwest Air Ambulance ones didn't, although they do now. A basis doctor, local basis doctor, was in work at A&E at West Cumberland Hospital. He was tasked as well, and we were retasked from our job in Carlisle. En route, the basis doctor had assessed the casualty and sent a message saying he thought we might need to do a thoracotomy to open his chest. Thankfully, that wasn't the case in the end. So there was a bit of a delay us getting there because of being on the other job. And this is the geography of where it was. So Workington was right out west here, again, even further from an MTC compared to my last job. We were up at Carlisle, and the Blackpool helicopter had flown up from Blackpool to Workington. It was in the middle of Workington Harbour there at the end of the road, right near a pier. And so that was where the Northwest Air Ambulance landed, and we initially landed there and repositioned to nearer to the casualty. When we got on scene, it was clear that a piece of 3x2 wooden planking had come up through the floor of the engine compartment, out through the glove box, and had gone straight through the right upper anterior chest of this young lad, out the back of his chest and into his seat, through the seat, in fact. But amazingly, he was GCS 13. He's reasonably hemodynamically stable at that stage, and little signs of any other injury. He'd been given morphine and ketamine by the basis doctor, but we set up for an RSI just because we thought that once he was cut free, he might well deteriorate. And he was at the point of being extricated when I got there. This is the piece of wood that went through the engine compartment, and this is it coming out of the glove box at the other side. So when I got there, he'd been cut free by the fire service. There's 2 inches of wood sticking out the front and the back of his chest, and he was put onto a stretcher and was lying in the right lateral position. He couldn't lie supine because of the wood sticking out of his back. There wasn't very much bleeding. He was quite agitated, and at that point his conscious level dropped to a GCS of 8. His respiratory rate increased. He was gasping for air. His lungs were decompensating. So we couldn't get a blood pressure. So the decision was made to RSI him. And his pre-RSI observations at that point, his heart rate was 130. We could possibly just about feel a radial pulse, SATs of 80. So we performed the RSI with him lying in the right lateral position, which was extremely challenging to say the least. He had a standard rocuronium and ketamine induction, and as soon as he was asleep, he had bilateral thoracostomies performed, which stabilized him significantly. We thought we were going to have to give him some blood, but in the end, we didn't need to because his blood pressure came up once we'd done the thoracostomies. This is a picture of a piece of wood sticking out of his back. This is his head here, and this is the bit of wood. And then this is the bit of wood sticking out the front of his chest here, looking from the sort of head end. And this is doing the intubation on his side, which clearly is extremely challenging in this position. That's him with the tube in place. So because of once we'd stabilized him, because of the way he was lying, we had to swap him around the normal way that we would put him in the aircraft. We gave him IV antibiotics, and he was pretty stable all the way through the flight to the RVI. We pre-alerted, and he pretty much didn't stop in A&E, went straight through to theatre, had a lateral thoracotomy and had the piece of wood removed. Luckily, it had missed all the key essential structures and blood vessels, and he ended up, apart from losing a couple of bits of rib and a bit of, I think he had a partial lobectomy, he made a pretty much complete recovery, which was a miracle, really. So just moving on to the mountain rescue aspect of the work that I've done. For those of you that are not aware, mountain rescue is run by volunteers, essentially. Amazing bunch of volunteers. It's free of charge, but they are delegated to do the work they do from the police. And the police have overall jurisdiction and responsibility for the work they do. Every single mountain rescue member is first aid trained, but some teams do also have a doctor or doctors and nurse or paramedics. They have a special dispensation from the Home Office to give IM morphine as well, which is unusual because a lot of first aiders obviously can't do that. But if you're part of a mountain rescue team and done the first aid training, you can do that. And they can call on the air ambulance and search and rescue helicopters anytime. Their main duties are casualty recovery and treatment, searches, and obviously very helpful in major incidents. In Cumbria, there's the Lake District Search and Mountain Rescue Organisation, which is a subset of MRC, England and Wales. There are 13 teams in the lakes. We are the busiest area of mountain rescue in the UK, the Langdale team being the busiest, the Langdale Ambleside team with 120 a year. The Keswick team get about 80 to 100, and the team I was part of, Patterdale team, gets 60 per year. This was one of the very first rescues that I was part of. Back in the day, we used to call on the Sea King helicopters of the Royal Air Force, the RAF, and this was actual pictures of a rescue that we were involved in. I was in this aircraft here. We just started off a training exercise back at our base when the call came in for somebody having fallen off Sharp Edge on Blencathra. And as you can see, it was winter time, it was icy, and they'd slipped down a gully, 100 foot or so down this gully, but had stopped halfway down on a small ledge. It was extremely difficult flying in. The helicopter flew in between sort of bursts of mist. You can see in this other picture here, there's a bit of mist coming in. And this is actually me being winched out of the aircraft down to where the casualty was here. It doesn't look very steep, the ground, but actually it was probably about 30-degree slope. It was really quite steep. And this is him here. Once we got landed down where the casualty is, the helicopter had to stay in the hover over us because the mist came in. And if he'd left, he'd flown away, as they normally do, we would he would certainly not have got back to us and would have been stuck. So he stayed in the hover, so I had to treat the patient, put him onto a stretcher, and so on. He was quite agitated, had multiple injuries and abrasions, had a possible fractured pelvis and a fractured leg. We had to get him onto a stretcher and then winch back up, all under the downwash of the Sea King helicopter, which was extremely difficult. However, he was flown to the RVI, and again, after a period of time on ITU, made a reasonable recovery. But again, very challenging conditions, and you just have to do what you can. Clearly, the sort of input we put here was less than we would do at the roadside, purely because we were perched on the side of a hill. This is us being winched back up into this is the patient here being winched back up into the Sea King. And as you can see, by this point, we were stuck in cloud, so that the helicopter didn't want to leave. This is what it looks like in the back of the Sea King. We don't use these now. It's over to the Coast Guard, but there's a fair amount of space in the back of it. As I say, the search and rescue, this is the These are the AW189 and S92 aircraft that now come in and do the rescues for us. Certainly, if the weather's too bad for the air ambulances to get in, or if it's nighttime and or somebody needs winching, then this is what we will call on to come. The mountain rescue guys will call on to come and help. They're based though at Prestwick, Carnarvon, and Humberside. They're the nearest ones to us. And they can take a lot longer to get to the Lake District unless they're already here practicing than obviously the air ambulances. At night time, it takes even longer. They can take about 45 minutes to even get airborne because they have to look at maps and plan routes and things because it's dark, and then it can take another 45 minutes to fly to the Lake District. So it can take up to an hour and a half to get a search and rescue helicopter to us. And this takes you on to my last sort of big case presentation, which was in 2013, 10 o'clock in the morning. Again, I was on the air ambulance, and the police had received a 999 call to say a walker had fallen off Scarfield Pike, which, as those of you know geography, is the biggest mountain in the Lake District. And nobody was with the casualty, but they thought he probably had serious injuries. His friend was standing on a col just above where he'd fallen off. It was winter time again. It was, as it always is, it's cold, misty and damp. And the ambulance service was informed. We have an online reporting system called SARCOR, where mountain rescue guys and air ambulance and the police enter like a current ongoing log, a current log system, which is really useful. Nobody can see what everybody else is doing. The local mountain rescue team, Wasdale, was called, and at that stage we had Sea-King helicopters. So the Sea-King was called from Prestwick, as we were too. We were on scene within about 10 minutes, and we could see where the casualty was, but we couldn't land because there was too much mist. So the helicopter dumped me down at the bottom. I managed to scramble back up to the col where the casualty had fallen and got to him just shortly before the mountain rescue guys arrived. He was lying sort of head up position on a 40-degree slope in amongst a load of scree. It was wet, slippy, there was swirling mist. And this, although there's no mist here, this was actually the incident itself in a gap in the clouds. Somebody took the picture. The casualties down here at the bottom of the picture being attended to. And you can see here just down at the bottom, slightly blurred picture, but those are the sort of conditions we were working in. So my initial casualty assessment was that he had a chest injury. It was tender on both sides. He had increased respiratory rate, possibly had a fractured right femur, possible chest injury, some head wounds, reduced conscious level. So we did the best we could in the situation. We put up some IV. We gave him put some splintage on his pelvis and his leg, gave him a little bit of saline, and then lifted him onto the mountain rescue stretcher. Unfortunately, the Sea-King tried to get in to winch, but couldn't because the mist was too low. But at that point, there was a slight gap in the mist, so our air ambulance managed to land up on the col. So we then decided to carry him up to the col, which was extremely hard work. We normally try and sledge people down a hill, but we had to carry him uphill to get to the casualty. And by the time we got there, he was a lot more agitated, much more reduced conscious level. So we decided to perform an anaesthetic, which we did. Stabilized him, loaded him onto the helicopter and flew him to Preston, which is the nearest major trauma centre. Took 15 minutes to fly him there, and he was pretty stable on the way. So he was within the MTC within 90 minutes of the fall, and again made a full recovery and came back and visited us and the rescue teams sometime later to thank us. This was us doing the anaesthetic, and you can see the mist around and about as we set up to do the kit dump and do the anaesthetic itself before loading him onto the helicopter and then flying away to Preston. But this is the space that we have in the back of the helicopter. The Dauphin helicopter is brilliant for space. You have a lot of space in the back. Well, it's all relative, but you can at least get to the whole of the casualty. So if you need to do more stuff en route to hospital, you can do that. A lot of the aircraft, the patient is kind of stuck down a tunnel, and you can only get to the chest and the head of the patient. This is just a different view. So we work, the air ambulance works very often with the mountain rescue guys, and this is what it can look like on one of our Lake District hills. So the final section is just getting on to talk about major incidents. Clearly, Major incidents are things that we hope will never happen, but they sometimes do. I did my very first MIMS course many years ago, thinking there would never be a major incident in Cumbria. But the ones down the right here are all ones that I've been to since then, including a Greyrig train crash in 2007, a couple of floods, Keswick bus crash in 2010, where 64 young teenagers on the way back from school were in a coach that tipped over on its side, and sadly a couple of youngsters died there. And a Shap jet crash before that. But of course, we have to be mindful about national and international major incidents as well. I was unfortunate enough to attend the Manchester bombing along with many others. But again, there are terrorist type incidents that could occur at any time, and also the sort of what I'd term national major incidents like the Grenfell Tower. So this was the Keswick bus crash that I went to, with some young people trapped underneath the bus there. This was the Greyrig train crash, where the lead carriage on the left there had derailed on a set of faulty points, and the whole lot had tumbled down this embankment. Sadly, only one person lost their life here. We had about 8 or 10 P1s and a similar number of P2s, priority 2s. But the rest were all walking wounded and managed to get out of the train relatively unscathed. And of course, the Grenfell Tower that we know about. So I mentioned at the beginning, I'm part of the ambulance service merit service, which stands for Major Medical Emergency Response Incident Team, where basically we have a group of almost 50 doctors who are employed by the ambulance service to perform an advisory role at silver level or tactical level. So if a major incident was declared in the NWAS patch, there are 2 doctors on call every 24 hours, and one or both of them would be called to perform a sort of advisory role alongside the ambulance tactical commander, and work closely with them to give advice. And I think this service is really quite unique throughout the country, but a very valuable service. And we have close contact with the National Incident Liaison Officer, the NILO, during major incidents. So, I like to think of everybody working together. This symbol here just indicates how basics and SAR and mountain rescue and air ambulance all work together. NWAS, I would like to think, link them all up here, all for the benefit of the patient in the middle. And this has all been developed over the last few years. So what changes have there been in the last few years? Well, you can see this picture here. This is a good old style Bedford ambulance to the latest electric FRV here. It's quite a change in vehicles, but also a change in many other ways. So what changes have there been that I've noticed over the last 30 years? Well, in air ambulances, they have progressed hugely, certainly in this area over the last 30 years. As I say, when I first came here, there was no air ambulance at all. And when it did start, it was very small. And now they have a proper 24/7 functioning service with a doctor and a critical care paramedic on each aircraft. And so they can provide enhanced critical care 24 hours a day. All of them are trained to do pre-hospital emergency anaesthetics, and all the aircraft and the FRVs with GNAS now carry blood as well, essentially bringing A&E to the patient. A huge advantage. I mean, the double paramedic crews are great, but the doctor plus paramedic crew can do so many more things than a double paramedic crew can on their own, certainly in this country. I think it's different in other countries. In places like Australia, paramedics can do anaesthetics and things like that, but in this country, that's not happening as yet, unfortunately. Medical equipment too has become lighter, smaller, easier to use. As I mentioned briefly, we use the Touch 7 Schiller Touch 7 monitor, which is absolutely brilliant. It's a touch screen and very easy to use, very lightweight, very robust. One of our doctors just recently was at an incident where it was pouring rain and it was a fire, so there was water on the road, and the Touch 7 got completely saturated in water, but it still worked. Amazing device. And we all carry now these butterfly ultrasound scanners, little tiny little tiny scanners that plug into your iPad device, and you can scan the chest. You can use it to help cannulation and so on, and a very, very useful bit of kit. And we all carry now video laryngoscopes. Certainly in this area, we carry the McGrath video laryngoscope, which is a really neat little bit of kit. Very small, very lightweight, but a great backup to doing direct laryngoscopy. And of course, the chest compression devices, and again, in this area, we use the Lucas 3 now, which is fairly lightweight. It's not the lightest bit of kit, but certainly a very useful bit of kit for doing chest compressions and so on. And in mountain rescue, again, they don't have the Schiller Touch 7s. They have smaller, even smaller devices, but more just for monitoring and defibrillation. The gears, obviously, warmer, lighter, more waterproof. They're talking about bringing in Penthrox to some of the teams in the UK, which is, I think, very useful for first aiders from the mountain rescue point of view. And one of the biggest changes in mountain rescue has been the IT system, that all the radios with the mountain rescue guys now are they have geolocating on, so that people down in the control centers of their rescue bases can see where every single individual member of the rescue team are as they're out on the rescues. And that can be plotted into the mapping technologies that they now have. So searches are much easier to plot and to track and so on. And I've mentioned already about the SARCAL logging system, which they log on to every time they do a rescue job. So this is almost my penultimate slide. This is basically a sort of final sum up to show that, you know, we kind of work together. So you've got here a picture of helicopter, basics, fire, ambulance. Police car is here, but it's just out of sight. So all working together to provide that level of care for our patients in a very remote part of the world. Yeah, and that's essentially my talk. If you need to know more information, those are our websites: Great North Air Ambulance and Beat Doctors. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and so on. And any questions?
I am here, I promise.
There
Wonderful. Thank you. Hello. Thank you so much. And I don't think I really need to say much else. Our good friends and Phil, hello. I didn't realise you were in the chat whilst I was bigging you up earlier before as well. I think everyone else has said it for me. Just inspiring, wonderful talk. And someone's very nicely put that they breathe a sigh of relief when you turn up on incidents as well. So absolutely brilliant. And what an inspirational talk, what inspirational work that you do. So as always, everyone, I'm just going to do my usual when I'm on one screen, which is kind of share the background view of said slides rather than going to full screen. Otherwise, we're not going to get any questions up. So before, let me just check. Yeah. So before we move on to the Q&A section, I just want to bring everyone's attention to our next webinar. We are going to be joined by Claire Ashton-James, all the way from, I believe she's in Adelaide, Australia. So she's speaking to us all the way from Australia to talk about the importance of communication in pain management. She's been doing this as a senior clinician over in Australia for 25 to 30 years now. So going to be a fantastic talk from an international speaker. And that's taking place on Thursday, May the 23rd at 8 o'clock. Do scan the QR code that's on your screen now to sign up for what is going to be a wonderful, wonderful talk. Just leave that up for a second or two, just in case people are scrambling for phones. Hopefully not. Okay, wonderful. And now the section that we all look forward to, which is the Q&A section. Again, I just want to draw everyone's attention to the QR code that's on your screen. Now, I do apologise if I sound a bit bunged up as well. I think hay fever is starting to hit in. But I do want to just draw your attention to the QR code that's on your screen now. This is the QR code for non-members of Trauma Care. If you are not a member of Trauma Care and you would like a CPD certificate for joining in tonight's webinar, do scan the QR code that's on your screen now. If you can't, do not worry. I will be sending out an email to everybody who join in with tonight's talk to be able to access the talk and the certificate tomorrow. But do scan the QR code that's on your screen now to get a CPD certificate. And don't forget, if you want to sign up and become a member of Trauma Care as well, you don't have to scan the QR code. Sign up and I will issue your certificate to you free of charge tomorrow. So on to the questions. So this was answered a little bit earlier on, Theo, and I know that you touched on it very briefly, talking about sort of where you've developed over the last 30 years and how things have progressed in that time, in terms of the equipment that you've got now. However, Jeff Lett has asked, in your emergency car, what do you carry in terms of equipment?
So yeah,
So everything, your bag.
Yeah, our bag. So essentially, yeah, that we have a main kit bag which would have in, I guess, all the stuff that normal paramedics would have. So we've got IV stuff, cannulation stuff, and so on. A little bit of fluids like normal saline, as well as hypertonic saline. But we also carry a little bit of surgical stuff as well, which is what paramedics don't carry. So we'll carry Spencer wells, forceps, a couple of clamps, scalpels, things like that, for doing things like thoracotomies and thoracostomies, and those sort of things. That's in, I guess, the main bag. But I say also we each have now a butterfly ultrasound scanner. We all have a Touch 7 Schiller monitor. In our main response vehicles, because they're slightly bulkier, that's not in our own cars, but we have the Lucas chest compression devices, and we have a Hamilton ventilator as well in our response cars as well. So along with obviously oxygen as well. I guess that's essentially it in a nutshell.
Wonderful, thank you. Very succinct. This might end up being a bit of a longer question, so I'm going to ask it now just in case. But someone in the chat has actually asked, your case stories were inspirational. However, they would like to know how you sorry, it just moved then. How you would assess your learning points when things have gone wrong. So how do you counteract wrong, basically?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough thing to say when things have gone wrong. I think that's possibly a little bit strong. I think sometimes things don't go as well as we would have liked. And you're absolutely right. Every single job is different. Every single job goes a different way. You can train for all of these things. You can go on all of the courses, the wonderful courses that trauma care and basics and so on put on. But actually each individual case is very, very different. And so what we do very frequently, and in our basic scheme, certainly we have a training session every month, and we will look back on some of these jobs and we will go through them and look at what the learning points are and what we could have done differently. And I think that's really, really important. And, you know, I've been doing this, I'm getting a bit long in the tooth, and I've been doing this for 30 years, and I'm still learning things every single job I go to. And actually, it's really, really important to reflect on those things. And we usually have a hot debrief. And if there's anything in particular that I'm worried about, I'll ring up one of my colleagues in the basic scheme and say, what should I have done differently? But then we do have a more formal process of debrief and learning at our regular monthly training.
Wonderful, thank you. And yes, I think that just it's the power of communication more than anything, isn't it? On that kind of stuff. Yeah. I do see questions coming into the chat, guys. I will try and remember to come back to them, but I'm just going to loop back to the actual Q&A box. Very simply, Joshua Brown has asked, what kind of training do the merit doctors receive?
The merit doctors, yeah, good question. So we have to do 5 days every year of training, 3 days of it's just down to 2 days now. Sorry, 2 days of that are with North West Ambulance Service as part of their sort of commander training, and then another 2 or 3 days of, well, 1 day of mandatory training and 2 days of going out with paramedics in their cars, getting the clinical experience and so on. And we have to repeat that every year. We do 5 days every year of training, which is paid for by North West Ambulance Service.
Wonderful, wonderful. And that's great to hear that it's an ongoing thing as well.
I can just plug that. I think they've just advertised for more merit doctors. So if you're living, whoever put the question is, if you're living in this area, or anybody that lives in this area, if you think you qualify, go onto the NWAS website and you'll get the job advert there.
Excellent. And that actually very nicely leads me on to my next question. George McNaughton has asked, they are an aspiring pre-hospital HEMS doctor and they're keen to do it through GP or A&E. What extra training or skills do you need before you started doing, did you need personally before you started doing the basics work? And how did you then transfer to air ambulance work? And then in a similar vein, someone has asked in the chat, as a current student paramedic striving to end up in critical care, what's your best piece of advice on the journey? So how did you become you, basically, and what can other people do to do it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm slightly different from what the system is now. I'm a bit unique in that I kind of just fell into the job. I mean, in terms of starting off at basics, before I talk about air ambulance, so to do basics as a GP, any GP can do it, as with any A&E doctor and so on. You just need to go and do the sort of simple introductory courses. Like basics run a 5-day course, which is really good to do, or a 3-day course and so on. So you do those initial courses, then I would recommend attaching yourself to a basic scheme and then joining up with them, doing co-responding, going out on jobs together, linking up with the local ambulance service and shadowing, going out on ambulances and so on. And it's a progression gradually that way. I was slightly different because when I got into the air ambulance is because I'm just a simple, humble GP. I'm not an anaesthetist. I've never done any anaesthetics. And I just sort of kind of went through the air ambulance training courses for doing the anaesthetics that we need to do at the roadside. And I've just continued to do it. And GNAS have been great in terms of keeping me on board and allowing me to do that. However, nowadays, if you want to start working as an air ambulance doctor, you have to essentially you have to be anaesthetic trained. You have to have done the 2 years of CCT, I think it's called, and you have to, and then also you have to do another 2 years of FEM training as well. So it's quite a it's a longer process now, but it's a more structured process. And I think I have to hold my hands up and say, actually, it's probably a safer, better process now, rather than just GPs like me falling into it. You wouldn't be able to do it the way I did it. Now you have to go through the proper training courses.
And I suppose that's probably the best piece of advice that I think anyone sort of striving to get into that position as well could offer is go to the courses, do the extra learning, and do as much as you can to get yourself on that journey. So I hope that's helped both of our aspiring students. The wonderful Phil Calburn has asked, over your immense experience, what do you think has been the most pivotal change in pre-hospital care?
That's a good question. I mean, as I've mentioned in my talk, there have been lots of changes, but I think from speaking as a doctor and the patients I've seen, the two key things, procedures that I think have made a difference in terms of survivability for patients. There may be three things. One is providing pre-hospital emergency anaesthetics at the right time. It's not always the right thing to do, but when it's the right time, it is the right time. Giving of blood pre-hospital as well is absolutely amazing. I've seen people survive who I didn't think would survive, and Chris Smith from GNAS has just done some studies, phantom study and so on, which have proven that we have had a lot of unexpected survivors because they've had blood. And then one of the other things I think is things like moving away from using neck collars to using pelvic binders. I remember when I first started, we put neck collars on everybody. We hardly ever put any pelvic binders on, and yet they're lying there with fractured pelvises, bleeding out. Now we put pelvic binders on almost everybody, and nobody gets a neck collar. And those three things probably, I think, have gone a long way to improving survivability for patients that are big sick.
Wonderful, wonderful. James Blake has asked, where is your nearest heart base? They don't know your area and are interested to know how regularly you interact with that section of the wider ambulance team.
Good question. I should have mentioned that in my talk. You're absolutely right. Our nearest heart base is Manchester, unfortunately, Manchester and Liverpool. A couple of the major incidents that we've had, like the coach crash I mentioned, heart was set off, but by the time they got to us, it was pretty much all wrapped up. There is a heart base over in Newcastle as well, so it's a bit 50-50 as to which one comes. But essentially, the heart from NWAS is based at Manchester. They're talking about putting a heart base in Carlisle, but it's not happened yet.
Well, hopefully it does, because that is a long way to go for a major incident, isn't it? So
it absolutely
fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Oh,
okay. So Danny Grace has asked more of a practical question in terms of your actual medical practice. So they have asked, and of course you can ask Danny, what is your advice around skin to scoop versus trying to keep the patient warm and the anticoagulation factors involved by secondary movement of the patient versus cold causing anticoagulation? They hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always a bit of a judgment call at the end of the day, because some of the cases that we've dealt with, like the ones I've mentioned up on the hillside, where it's absolutely freezing cold and it's snowing and frosty and so on. You don't want to be cutting the clothes off, but we are taught that you should cut all their clothes off and then wrap them up warm, just so that you can expose them properly and examine them properly and find all those injuries. So in an ideal world, it is the best thing to cut the clothes off, but then get them wrapped up warm as quick as possible. But if you're out on the hillside, you practically can't do that. I think most of the RTCs that we go to, we do tend to cut most of their clothes off. But we have the blizzard blankets now, which are absolutely brilliant, with the heat packs in them, the kind of foil or total body incorporating foil blankets that wrap around patients, which have the heat blankets in. We've got lots of ambulance blankets, and in the air ambulance, we have a thing called a Flectalon, which is like a woolly sleeping bag that zips up around the patient as well. So we'll have all three of those things: ambulance blankets, the Flectalon, and the blizzard blanket, which we will wrap around the patients. Because you're absolutely right, we can't let our patients get cold. And then particularly when we anaesthetize them, they lose their thermoregulation. And so that will make them cool down even more, which won't help with their coagulation, their coagulopathy. So yeah, ideally, if you can cut the clothes off, but you have to be practical. If you're in a blizzard, in a rainstorm, whatever, you can't do it.
Brilliant, thank you. And Danny, I was actually going to mention this anyway. So I do believe in terms of the blizzard blankets, bubble wrap, not quite as good. But if you do want to purchase some for your own sort of personal medic bag and just to have on you, if you go to, I believe, Medics Lodge, DS Medical and Reflex Medical, one of those three, could be the Medics Lodge, actually have started producing their own. And if you go there and are a member of Trauma Care, you do get a 10% discount at the Medics Lodge site. And I believe they've got some real high quality blizzard blankets for sale at this moment in time. So do check them out if you do want something that would work in those scenarios. Yeah. And last, but certainly not least, we have, I'm going to say your name wrong. I'm so sorry. It's an Irish name. So I'm going to guess it's Graham, but if I'm wrong, I do apologize. Has asked, what's the one piece of kit that has changed your practice?
Oh, one piece of kit that changed your practice.
One.
My goodness, that's a difficult question because there are so many bits of kit. I guess I would say probably the monitor that we now use, this Schiller monitor, is so good. It's so easy to use, so reliable. I guess that most recently, we've had these the last 18 months, and they are just brilliant bits of kit. I guess that it just gives you more reassurance, I suppose, that you've got decent monitoring. Wonderful,
thank you very much. And I'm glad you did manage to narrow that down to one, because there's so many pieces of kit out there that anyone could be using, and
huge.
It's nice to hear just someone has the favourite, essentially.
Yeah.
So Theo, thank you so much for such an inspirational, brilliant talk. The case studies were fascinating to listen to, and then to answer gracefully all the questions that came through as well, because there were quite a lot tonight. So thank you very much for your time this evening and coming to talk to us. And to everyone that's joined us tonight as well, thank you very much. And of course, as always, thank you to our sponsors. QualSafe, if you scan the QR code that's on the screen now, you can find out more about them. They are a first aid training company with lots of courses available, booklets, leaflets, practical courses, all sorts available. And I am also rocking one of their very nice polo shirts tonight. Galen, hopefully you've all heard of them by now. They are a pharmaceutical company who administer all sorts of things that a lot of you will use. If you want to find out more about the usage, about how to use their different products, do check out the QR code and go to their website. And of course, Icarus, the Power of Health. They do lots of really, really cool, practical, VR-based courses, all sorts of wonderful things that very highly relate to tonight as well, because a lot of their courses are all around extreme situations. So if you want to find out more about them and their upcoming courses, do scan the QR code now. And that is all I have to say this evening. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone in the chat. Thank you, everyone, for joining us from all over the world. Again, I've seen something, I think someone joined us from South Australia, which is wonderful. I saw someone here from Wales as well, so diolch to you. It's lovely to see people joining us from all over. Theo, thank you very much again. Wherever you are in the world, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night, all. Thank you.
Good night.